Jeremy Maligi. I work for Service Mesh. We're a company out of, I can project louder. Hello! Or I can just shove it onto my face like this.
Oh, your collar. Sure.
We do both. Okay. How about this instead? Okay. Yeah? I don't know. In the back? Yes? No?
That's good.
Okay, now we're good. Great. Okay, so, hi. My name is Jeremy Maligi. I work for a company called Service Mesh. We have an office in Santa Monica and Austin, and we do some really cool stuff. But today, I'm going to be talking to you guys about localization and translation in Angular, or how not to hate yourself 3 months from now when your PO asks for Spanish or German, Chinese, Arabic, etc. support, because it will happen and you will be very sad. So, sort of as a big overview, I'm going to quickly build and add dynamic translation to an Angular application. So we're going to do that all from scratch. Ryan sort of showed us, I actually am using Plunkr today, so for all my stuff, yay. So we're going to go through a couple of things. We're going to build out a really, really basic application with JSPM and System.js, which is sort of a huge topic to go over. It's a module loader for ES5 that allows you to do really crazy magic that you'll see in a second. But long story short, it's fun, it's going to be really fast, and we're going to throw in Angular real quick. So, first thing, Plunk's already set up. So, here we are, it's our index. The magic happens here. We have System.js loaded, and you can see a really, really basic Angular setup. It's called Translate App. We have a controller, I use controller as, and we're doing just a simple variable, displaying it on the screen. Take a look at our app. Hey, okay, we have that. Cool. And we have this controller, but oh my god, we're using require, and it's like it's just there, it's magical. And we're loading in something with a tilde for some reason. Okay, great. Well, that's because we're loading it from this translation test controller. So all the coolness of using Browserify with none of the madness or sort of putting it all into one app file. So here we are. We have just one variable, test. And says hello, and let's just run it, make sure everything runs fine. It's going to pull out everything. In a couple of seconds here, it will actually have Angular on the page and say hello. Woo. Okay, cool. So great, we got our application. Great. So now plugins, super simple. But if you haven't done a lot of Angular, maybe you haven't had to load one in. Angular has a sweet module system. You can load in third-party modules that allow you to do great things with new services or new directives or new filters. Can save a lot of time, and they're pretty great. So let's put in a couple of ones that I use often. Angular Animate, which is sort of included with Angular, but you have to grab it. And Angular Strap, which is an Angular implementation of Bootstrap 3. So we'll put those in, we'll show you what that looks like. So pop over to our app.js. So we have an app, but now we have dependencies. So after you declare the app, you have a array of dependencies that you want to load in. Angular sort of expects them to be there, so you can see in this case we've required Angular Strap and we've required Angular Animate, and through magic with system it's going to go grab those for us. So now those are going to be on the page. There's really not much extra to see, so we'll just kind of move on from here. Great. So now what we're here for, Angular Translate. So, Angular Translate was written by Pascal Precht. He's a really, really cool guy. He's pretty active in the Angular community. He wrote Angular Translate, but he also wrote some really interesting articles on his blog. One is about implementing web components into Angular 1x, which I grabbed a whole bunch of stuff from, but he's a great guy, totally worth seeing his blog. Yeah, so the basic idea behind Angular Translate is we want to have an ability to dynamically translate our application from any language that we want, as long as we have keys for it, at runtime. So we don't want to have to do sort of an old style compilation, and like we have to go and grab this giant list of files from somewhere on the server and compile that into these sort of hard-coded strings that are going on our page. That's like really lame, and you have to compile 12 different versions of the app, and it's just not fun. So instead, we get to do it all with Angular dynamically. It's kind of fun. So the basic syntax for Angular Translate is its filter. So as you can see here, yes, excellent. So we have an expression. We provide it with some key as a string or as a variable of some kind, pass it into the translate filter, and it just works. We get a translation based on our currently set language. So let's show that off. So as you can see, our index HTML, we have one key, foo, and translate, and that's all we have to do in our actual HTML. So if we pop into app.js, you can see, oh, whoa, we have some translations now. So we loaded in the module, like we were just talking about, so just another module. And then we do a config block. So a lot of times when you bring in these third-party modules, you have to configure them. You have to make them do what you want them to do. So in this case, we have the option to actually load in our translation keys in our app config or somewhere else within Angular. You don't actually have to do that. There's a whole bunch of different methods to go and grab it off of a static file somewhere if you have it like stored from some company that you get translations from, or you can load like partials of files, and it's actually really nice. But in this case, since I'm doing a demonstration, we just put it into our. So you can see we've got a couple of different keys, title, foo, some buttons that we're going to deal with later. So I've got it in English, I've got it in German, and then I also have it in Japanese to show you that you can use any sort of characters that you want to. It doesn't really matter. Great, so I think that's really all there is to show for this one, so let's run it. You can see that's what it looks like when it gets there. We're going to actually load it in, and whoa, it translated. This is a paragraph. Awesome. Cool. So still not super impressive, but we're getting there, I promise. So there's a couple other ways that you can run translate. The second is you can actually use it as a directive. So you can see we've got our first one here where we use our filter. The second is we use a directive. So on any tag, doesn't really matter, add translate as an attribute and then put the key inside of the directive and it will translate for you. And there's actually one more that I don't really recommend just because it brings in some weird complications that I'll show you in a couple minutes. But you can actually bring in a translate service. So you get $translate, you pass it a key, it returns to you a promise that will eventually resolve to your translated key. Great, right? Basic stuff. So let's take a quick look at what that guy looks like. Close the other ones. So now you can see we've got a span with the translate directive in it. Again, just what I just showed you guys. But also, if we go and take a look at our controller, we've got this $translate bit. So we have a special translation, then we're going to set it on the scope. What's actually on the scope on the controller? So one more thing, you saw that it was special dot translation. That was to show off that it does actually allow you to nest your translations in an object. You can just provide it to it that way. So when you're creating your translations, you can organize them, which is way, way nicer than just having one giant flat file, especially if you've ever had doing translation. It's pretty great. So that all works. Again, let's take a quick look. So we've got our 3 different versions, and whoa, it's there now, crazy. So the basics, all done. So that's all well and good, but where's the magic, right? Like this is Angular, we're supposed to have some really cool stuff. It's supposed to like make everyone sort of its modus operandi. So whoa, there's a thing to click here, crazy. So gonna click that guy, load it. I have it in Bootstrap now because why not? So cool. So now we've got our same translation keys as before. Now we have 3 buttons. Well, what happens? Oh, we click German and whoa, it's all in German now. Instant translation from English to German, and now even Japanese. So really fast, and it's really dynamic. It's great, right? And so to do that, all we did was we created a function that was just the same translate service, and we just called .use with a translate with a key that we've set, which is usually synonymous with a locale. So we call translate.use a key, it returns to us a promise, then when it's done, we know that we've switched everything over. And so I was saying earlier, you don't generally want to use just $translate to do your translations because you get into this sort of situation where every time you change your language, you actually have to go through and redo all of your promises that have been done in the controller. You can also listen on an event and just fire them all, but it's if you can avoid it, you should, basically. So we can't really stop there though, because that's great. It's kind of shiny and you can change different things, but if you're really translating from one language to another, you have to worry about things like grammar and positioning differences between languages and also alignments in the case of like Arabic, for example, where we're going right to left. So you can't just, in a case of, it's like a really common case for an application is, say, number of items in cart, :4. You can't do that if you're switching from a right to left language to a left to right and vice versa. You have to actually interpolate the translation string. So there's a couple of tools to help us do that. The nicest one that integrates with Angular Translate is message format. And that was written by Alex Sexton. It's all about localized pluralization, selection, and interpolation, and it integrates into a couple of translation frameworks. So I'm going to do a little walkthrough of how that all works. So if we go and we take a look at our app.js, you can see that we have this plural key now. And there's a syntax here that I'll go over. So we can basically provide variables to our translation statements now. So inside of these brackets, we have the name of the variable first, followed by the type of replacement that we're doing. In this case, it's a selection, and you can just think of that as like a drop-down. They're going to have an option to choose one of 3 different, or X different things, but it has to be one of those specifically, and we're going to translate differently based on that. So in this case, it's a select. We have 3 different options: male, female, and other. And we're going to selectively replace that based on what they put in. And so that can change, especially with languages with conjugation based on gender. That's a really big deal, and you have to change full parts of the sentence. I tried really hard to have it be for German, but I was working super fast, so it actually turned out to be the same conjugation for the verb each time. But you can see here that for male, we do have the different words, and then we pulled in the verb as well, which is what you would have to do if you wanted to conjugate. And then for Japanese, it's all the same. So we can take a look at what that ends up doing for us. Nothing else had to change, by the way. We did one configuration difference in app.js to tell it to use message format, but nothing major at all. It's just a matter of pulling in the plugin and using it. So if we run that, and we wait for Angular to download again. So now, instead of English, German, Japanese, we also have male, female, and other. So they like this, female, she like this, other, they like this. And then we can switch to German, and we instantly get the same sort of replacement and interpolation, and the same thing for Japanese. Cool. So the last step here, before we can kind of be finished with this like toolbox of internationalization, is formatting. And so formatting for things like dates and currency and numbers obviously change based on your language and even your geographic location. Just people do things differently in different places. So Angular kind of supports this with $locale. We have the ability to change at the time that we start the application what locale the user is in, and that sort of gets set. But it's not really dynamic, and it's kind of a pain to change, especially during runtime. So while we're changing all these languages, wouldn't it be great to be able to change the locale as well? That would sort of give us the full package. So in comes Angular Dynamic Locale. That allows us to dynamically change $locale, sort of does all the legwork for us, and even returns to us this nice little event when it's done changing everything, just like Angular Translate does. So in order to make these things sort of glue together, you have to write yourself a tiny function. It's like super tiny, but that's all you have to do. Like you could just attach it to root scope or make a little service or whatever you really wanted to do. But what happens is when Angular Translate's done, it fires an event. And you can hook off of that event to tell your locale to change on the same key that you changed your translations to. And then once you do that, you have everything that you could ever want. So let's check out translation test. So we've got this.changeLanguage in here. So we tell the translate to use something. And in this case, we actually don't even need to listen on translate change success because I just did it in our controller. We get returned a promise that tells us when we're done anyway. So then I tell dynamic locale to set it based on the same key. And that's really it. So we just grab the dynamic locale. We say, OK, we just changed to DE. I want you to change to the DE locale. And you'll see that when we do that, we get some really, really nifty things. So we're in English right now. This is how we format numbers and dates and currency. And we can switch to German. So we can switch over to Euro and their formatting. And finally, we can switch over to Japanese and their formatting as well. And so that is the meat of how you would put together a really nice internationalization system. All the sort of building blocks are there with this. So I guess that's it. There's plenty of room for questions here about implementation or the tools or anything. So if you have any, go ahead. If not, thanks. Yeah, Scott.
Are there similar tools that handle not only the literal translation and interpretation, but the cultural piece too, with layouts changing for Asian languages versus Western languages and other things like that?
So you could definitely write something that'll change the layout for you based on language, and this would be a good place to hook into that. But I'm not sure if there's any like specifically written tools out there for it, but that is a really common problem to have to do. So like this gets rid of some of the problems with, say for example, if you are in Arabic and you have to go right to left, dealing with the strings. But many websites, if they have an Arabic and an English version, they will like flip the navigation to the other side as well, just because it's intuitive that way. So there's not like something built for that necessarily, but again, this should like supply you tools to be able to handle that a little bit better. Cam?
In the typical case, people aren't going to be changing their languages, but like I do want like all my customers to be able to use their own language,
Sure.
and not have to necessarily download the German pack if I'm a Japanese person.
Absolutely.
So do you have like any standard way of just serving the Japanese text?
Totally. So there's a couple different ways to do that. You can set a preferred language at the start if you want to, or dynamically. But you can also lazily load languages as you need them. So one of the nicer features of Angular Translate is the ability to go and grab static files for a language if and when you load them, and not until then. So we didn't do that here because I wanted to show it off quickly, but it is definitely a possibility. It's just a small plugin for it. That is a very common use case, though.
Some languages have a formal and familiar things like French and German. In
Sure.
German, or in French, like you, if I don't know you, or we're not, or we have a business relationship, is vous.
Yeah.
If you're a friend we've been out drinking, it's tu.
Right.
Are there translation packages that handle that, or does it always just default to the form?
So on most websites, it's going to be formal, but Angular Translate would definitely deal with that. You could just set a translation key for FR, dash, whatever you wanted, really. You could make two different translations, one that was familiar and one that's not, if you found the reason for it, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anything else?
The fifth time somebody gets to your website, it starts getting familiar.
Right. I mean, you can definitely do that. There's an option to do some local storage with those things.
Yeah. Oh, that was another question. I know the answer probably is, but is it possible to have the language change based on GPS location?
Definitely. Your default locale is set based on your location, and I think generally your default language is going to be set on your location as well.
Well, the default language should be based on what the browser tells the server, because
Exactly.
it'll tell the content language.
I'm just thinking like it'd be really great if there was a translated Angular app, like on your smartphone or something, that you're in San Diego, but then you decide to go down to Tijuana with a bunch of friends. All of a sudden, it's all Mexican.
Right.
That's right.
You could just add a few palm trees.
You could definitely do that. I mean, whether it's reading from your GPS coordinates, which I think we have in HTML5 now. You have the ability to ask
Yeah, there's a
GPS.
way to do it.
Yeah. So you could actually ask by GPS if you wanted to, although that might be jarring for people that were traveling, for example.
Yeah.
But still.
I'll have a joke to play on something.